The envelope was pale blue, thicker than usual. No return address. Just my name. Typed, not handwritten. I placed it beside my coffee mug. The rim still held a trace of yesterday's lipstick. Faded cranberry. Same shade I wore when I buried Mama. The wind hit the glass hard that morning. Bemidji's December wind. It whistled through the tiny gaps between the window frames, ones I'd meant to reseal. But instead, I picked up my chisel. The birchwood plank was cold, slightly warped from last week's snow. I ran my fingers across the grain, like tracing something familiar in a foreign world. The letter sat there, unopened. Not unreadjust, uninvited. When the blade struck wood, the sound filled the room. Sharp. Honest. Unlike words. You see, I've never been one for shouting. Never needed to be. I sanded my anger into smooth corners. Glued my doubts down with yellow carpenter's glue. Mama used to say, quiet people are just people who know when to speak. She said that on a spring day in 1984, right after I fixed her cabinet doors. With a hinge no man in town could get right. Walter didn't remember that. Or maybe he chose not to. He was the one who sent the letter. Said we should sell the house. Split the money. Because I was too old to keep it up. Because it was unfair to the market. Unfair. I'd lived here since I was 16. I took care of Mama until her last breath. I rebuilt the porch after the '92 ice storm. I painted the siding 3 times with my own hands. And now? Now he wants to erase me. Politely. With legal terms. The envelope was still there. I picked it up. Held it to my nose. Even paper carries intention. If you've been a carpenter long enough. I didn't cry. Didn't call. Didn't yell. I just opened the back door. Grabbed my apron. And kept working. Because I had learned something long ago. Sometimes, silence is not surrender. It's preparation. What would you do? If the only thing left between you and erasure was the sound of your own hammer? There used to be more tools on the wall. Chisels hung in perfect rows. Sandpaper sheets tucked in labeled tins. Mama liked order. She said it made even the messiest grief easier to clean. After she passed, I kept everything the way she left it. Even the broken clamp by the window. The one Walter said he'd fix but never did. Sometimes I'd sit there for hours. Not working. Just breathing in the smell of old wood and linseed oil. The quiet felt like her. Solid. Present. But not overwhelming. I spent that first winter alone. The lake outside froze hard. Ice clung to the trees like silver skin. Some mornings I watched deer tracks form. Then, disappear in snowdrift. The cold didn't scare me. It reminded me I was still alive. Still here. Still part of something that had roots. The house stayed quiet. But not lonely. Mama's mug still sat by the sink. Her wool coat hung near the back door. Smelling faintly of eucalyptus and old paper. A smell I once hated as a girl. But now it felt like a hug. Every time I passed that hook. I'd brew coffee at 6. Just like she liked it extra strong. No sugar. Then I'd step into the workshop. Her apron still hung by mine. Faded blue cotton. A threadbare pocket. Stitched with her initials. M. Halberg. We didn't talk much in her last years. Not because we didn't have things to say. But because silence felt softer than words. Some days, I'd just sit beside her. Mending the same chair leg over and over. While she watched the snow from the window. There was a peace in that. A rhythm. We understood each other through shared space. Through breath. Through the creak of the floorboards. And the smell of varnish. Walter never stayed long. He'd fly in from Minneapolis, bring a bottle of wine, and leave with a to-go box full of whatever stew I'd made. He'd always kiss Mama on the cheek. And say, "You're lucky to have June. She keeps the lights on around here." And Mama would smile. A soft, knowing smile. like someone who'd built a lighthouse and finally trusted it wouldn't crumble. But once she passed, the visits stopped. The calls thinned. The silence that used to comfort started to echo. Still, I stayed. Fixed what needed fixing. Kept the porch light on. Fed the birds. Turned the soil in the spring. And when the first tax letter came, marked joint inheritance, I just folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. Beneath the wedding photo of our parents, I told myself, he's just sorting things out. It's paperwork. It's nothing personal. But in my bones, I knew better. There's a kind of cold that doesn't come from weather. It comes from someone who knows your worth and pretends not to. Some people measure time in seasons. I measure it in repairs. The winter after Mama passed, I replaced the hinges on the pantry door. Spring came. I resealed the windows. By summer, the porch swing had a fresh coat of white. Same shade Mama used. Called it cloud milk. Said it made the house look like it could float. There's something holy about keeping things standing, especially when no one else sees the cracks. Sometimes I'd find myself speaking aloud. Not to anyone. Just to the room. Let's tighten that board next. Or, we'll fix the stool leg before supper. I don't think I was losing my mind. I think I just missed being seen. Heard. Needed. The mail always came around noon. Most days it was catalogs. Some political flyer. A coupon for canned soup. But every now and then, a white envelope. With that same sterile font. Always addressed to the Halberg estate. As if I were already gone. As if I didn't still sleep here. Eat here. Wake up every morning. To the same pine floorboards. I swept for half a century. Walter never called to warn me. Those letters were coming. No explanation. Just documents. Requests. Reminders. That my silence was an open door. He had started walking through. The second one came in May. Said something about liquidation of shared assets. Shared. I held that word like a splinter. Not enough to kill. But always there. Always under the skin. I stared at it for a long time. My name wasn't even on the first page. His was. Typed clean. Like a signature waiting for a crown. It wasn't anger that settled in my chest. It was something slower. Thicker. Like honey that had turned cold. I took the letter. Folded it 4 times. And slipped it behind the workshop shelf. Didn't even bother filing it. It didn't deserve the drawer. That night, I walked out to the porch. With Mama's shawl around my shoulders. The wind moved across the lake. But I didn't shiver. The stars were sharp. Cutting through the sky like glass. I remembered being 12. Watching the same sky with her. Her hand on my back. Telling me, silence isn't weakness, Junie. It's just the place where strong things begin. I sat there a long while. And the next morning, I made a list. Not of chores. Not of things to fix. But of what I would not allow. That list was short. Just one line. This house does not belong to silence. The next day, I opened the old filing cabinet in the back room. It stuck at the top. Just like it always had. Mama never let us replace it. Said it kept secrets better that way. Inside were folders labeled in her handwriting. Curved, precise, a little shaky near the end. House. Taxes. June's birth certificate. Walter, college loans. I brushed off the dust. Laid each folder flat on the kitchen table. The surface still had scratches from when I built that bookshelf in '89. I ran my hand across them. Marks from a life of trying. Of showing up. I opened the folder labeled, House. Receipts. Blueprints. A note in Mama's handwriting. Dated 10 years ago. Simple. Almost invisible in pencil. Gifted to June, for care beyond measure. No notary stamp. No big legal flourish. Just her words. And a copy of the deed. With my name. Only mine. I didn't smile. Didn't cry. I just sat there. Hands on either side of the page. Feeling the weight of it. Not just the legal weight. The truth of it. Mama knew what Walter didn't. That showing up. Year after year. Meal after meal. Appointment after appointment. It counted. Even if no one clapped. Even if no one came back to say thank you. The house was old. It leaned slightly west. The pipes groaned when the heat kicked in. But it stood because I stood. Because I hadn't left. Because I had cared enough to stay. I slid the folder back into its place. This time, I added a sticky note. Confirmed. June's name only. Keep safe. That night, I scrubbed the kitchen sink. Until my knuckles stung. Recocked the window by the fridge. And oiled the back door hinges. So they wouldn't squeal when opened. Not because Walter asked. But because it mattered to me. Outside, the lake had started to thaw. Small cracks in the ice. Quiet at first. But growing. I stood by the window. Watching the darkness soften. My breath fogged the glass. Somewhere deep in the trees. An owl called. Once. Then silence again. I whispered into the kitchen air. Not sure if to Mama. Or just to myself. I see what he's doing. But he's forgetting who taught me to stay still. And listen. That night. I slept with the deed tucked inside the drawer. Next to my bed. And when I woke. I didn't feel like a guest. In my own home anymore. I felt like the owner. But here's the question I keep asking myself. If they try to take your place in the story, do you write louder? Or just deeper? The invitation came by text. Not even from Walter. From his daughter Madeline. Grandpa's birthday this Saturday. Just family. Hope you're well. Just family. I stared at the screen for a long time. The words didn't sting at first. They just floated. Like dust in a sunbeam. You don't notice it until the light hits right. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed again. Then let the screen fade to black. That afternoon, I baked a small lemon loaf. It was Walter's favorite when we were kids. Mama's recipe. With a sugar glaze that cracked like glass. When you sliced it warm. I wrapped it in wax paper. Placed it in a tin with a note. Happy birthday, W. June. I drove into town the next morning. There were balloons tied to his porch railings. Blue and silver. A big number 68 on the door. Through the window, I saw them gathering. Laughing. Madeline carried a tray of deviled eggs. Someone handed Walter a gift bag. I stood there with the tin in my hands. The cake inside still warm from the oven. I hadn't even called first. Hadn't wanted to make it about me. I walked up the steps. The music inside was low. Old jazz. Something from Mama's record shelf. Then I heard it. Madeline's voice. Clear through the screen door. Grandma's apron is still hanging in the workshop. Should we toss it? It's kinda spooky. A few muffled laughs. And then Walter said. She won't notice. She never comes by anymore. I didn't knock. I placed the tin gently by the doormat. Stepped down. One slow stare at a time. I sat in the car for a while. The engine off. Hands on the wheel. Heart somewhere between fury and fog. Back home. The workshop smelled like dust and memory. I ran my fingers along the edge of Mama's apron. The faded blue cotton. The patch where she'd mended a burn hole. From leaning too close to the stove. I didn't cry. Tears felt too clean for this. This was something heavier. Like silence gone sour. That evening, I found the family group photo from Walter's wedding. I was there. Right beside Mama. Hands folded in my lap. Wearing the same shawl I wore last week. I checked his Facebook page. A new post. Same party. Same porch. New photo. No sign of me. Even in the memories. I was vanishing. And I couldn't help but wonder. When your name fades from their pictures, do you still belong to the frame? The next week, the trash truck didn't stop outside my house. It always had. For 30 years. Same driver. Same Thursday morning. I walked out with the bins anyway. Waited by the curb. The cold stung my knees. The snow hadn't melted yet. Not really. Just enough to turn the driveway slick. The truck slowed. Then rolled on. I watched it fade past the Halberts' place. Their dog barking like it always did. Except now it sounded more like punctuation than noise. That afternoon, I called the county office. New voice. Young. Polite. But clipped. Oh, Mrs. Halberg? Looks like the pickup zone changed. You're now part of Route 4. You'll need to bring the bins to the corner of Lawson and Threard. Lawson and Threard. 3 blocks. Uphill. I thanked her. Hung up. Didn't say a word about the arthritis creeping down my hip. Didn't say I barely made it up the basement stairs on bad mornings. Just nodded into the silence. That evening, I flipped through the community newsletter. There was a notice. New neighborhood council. Walter's name was listed. Vice chair. Bemidji Lakeshore District. It made sense. He always liked titles. He once made a badge for best raker of fall leaves and wore it to school for a week. But what struck me most was a line near the end. This council seeks to modernize usage of inherited properties to benefit the town's overall aesthetic and marketability. Inherited properties. No one had asked me. No letter. No meeting. No phone call. But here was my name. Not printed, but implied. Folded inside the word obsolete. I stood in the kitchen, holding the newsletter like it was damp. My eyes drifted to the corkboard by the fridge. Still pinned there. A faded postcard Madeline sent from Colorado years ago. Miss you, Aunt June. Wish we could have stayed longer. A child's handwriting. Uneven. Hopeful. I hadn't heard from her since Mama's funeral. I touched the edge of the pin. Let it bite my finger. Just a little. A real pain. Clean. Unlike the other kind. Later, I sat on the porch. As the streetlights flickered on, one by one, like a row of reluctant stars, I thought about how many things had been taken quietly. Not with force, but with distance. Like being written out of a chapter you helped draft. And I thought, if they can erase you, without a single word, what part of you is still yours to keep? Sunday used to mean something. Mama always made stew. Venison, if Walter had gone hunting. Or potatoes and carrots if not. The house smelled of bay leaves and pepper. By 10 in the morning, we'd eat in the sunroom. That old oak table creaked when we leaned on it. But nobody minded. There was always laughter. Even when the roof leaked. Even when the power flickered in storms. Now, the sunroom sat quiet. I dusted the table last week, but hadn't set it. Not even once. I ate in the kitchen. Standing up. Tuna on rye. No plate. No candle. A single fork in the sink. Felt like a surrender. Later, I checked the phone. No missed calls. No messages. Just one email. From Madeline's husband. A baby announcement. Attached photo. 3 generations. Walter holding the baby. Madeline smiling. His wife beside her. They all wore navy blue. Behind them, a fireplace mantel lined with frames. I zoomed in. No picture of Mama. None of the old house. No trace of the woman who taught Walter to tie his shoes with a mouthful of pins while sewing curtains. I closed the laptop. The silence afterward was almost warm. like when a storm passes. But the air doesn't clear right away. I stepped out to the porch. Still too early for spring, but I could smell wet earth. Under the snow, things were waiting. The pine tree out back had lost a branch, heavy with ice, split clean at the joint. I left it there. Let nature decide when to let go and when to hold on. I wrapped myself in Mama's old shawl. Wool, faded green, still smelled like cedar. A memory stitched into fabric. In the distance, a car door slammed. Not mine. Someone visiting the neighbors. I didn't look. I wasn't expecting anyone. Wasn't expecting anything, really. Except, maybe, to matter less each week. I stood there until the cold made my fingers ache. Then I went inside and turned on the lamp in the sunroom. No reason. No guest. Just light. A quiet kind. I sat at the oak table, placed both hands on the wood, and whispered into the stillness. I was here. And in that moment, I wondered, if no one witnesses your presence, does it still leave an imprint? It arrived in a plain envelope. No markings. No return address. Just my name. Typed again. Cold. Clinical. Inside. A 2-page document. Legal language. Centered in careful lines. Something about a property evaluation. A date circled in red ink. Not my handwriting. I laid it flat on the table. Breathed in slowly. The paper smelled new. Like it had never touched warmth. I turned the page. At the bottom, Walter's signature. Not a note. Not even a sticky tab. Just his name. Next to a line that said, intent to liquidate for mutual benefit. Mutual. The house wasn't his. Not legally. Not emotionally. Not in the way that mattered. I had washed every wall. Repaired every pipe. Held our mother's hand as she took her final breath. In the room facing the lake. He wasn't there. Not when she stopped eating. Not when she cried in her sleep. But now he wanted a slice of what he'd never built. I walked to the cabinet. Opened the top drawer. Pulled out the copy of the deed. My name. Printed clean. In Mama's careful script. Witnessed and notarized. By someone from church. I ran my thumb along the edge. Felt the weight of it. Heavier than the one he'd mailed. The contrast felt like insult. Like someone sending a funeral notice. To the one who dug the grave. I didn't call. Didn't email. Instead, I opened the workshop. The smell of old sawdust still lingered. And there, on the wall, hung the frame I'd carved after Mama passed. Inside was her recipe card. Lemon loaf. The one I'd baked for Walter. The one he never touched. I looked at the card. Faded ink. Smudged corner. Her handwriting still looped like music. That recipe had more legacy than the form he sent. I sat on the stool. The one with the worn cushion. The one Mama used to fix zippers and hem trousers. Long after arthritis stole her grip. And I whispered to the empty room. You knew better, Walter. Not as accusation. Just truth. Settled in the air. Like dust that never left. I folded his letter. Didn't tear it. Didn't burn it. I placed it gently. Beneath a stack of wood shims. Let it sit. Among things that held real weight. But the echo stayed. The kind that comes. Not from loud betrayal. But from realizing. They planned it quietly. Counting on you not to notice. And I had to ask myself. If someone steals what was never theirs. But signs your name beside theirs. How long before the world believes it belongs to both? 3 days passed. Before I heard from him. A voicemail. Short. Measured. As if written in a notepad. Before spoken aloud. Hey, June. Just checking in. I assume you got the packet. No rush on signing. We can go over it together. Next time I'm up. It's just the logical thing to do. The house is old. It'll cost too much to maintain. Anyway, let me know. The logical thing. As if logic ever scrubbed a floor. At 2 a.m. As if logic held Mama's hand. When her lungs gave up. I didn't call back. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table. With a pad of yellow paper. And made a list of what I'd fixed this year. Back steps, reinforced. Gutter nails, replaced. Fence gate, rehung. Guest room window, resealed. Wood stove, cleaned and rebricked. Next to each item, I wrote the date. Then, just beneath. Labor. 1 woman. I poured myself coffee. Dark roast. No cream. Same chipped mug. Mama used after church. The handle still bore the crack. From the time Walter dropped it. And she refused to throw it away. She holds things longer than she should. He once said. He meant the mug. But he meant me, too. I stood by the window. Outside, the lake had begun to ripple. Wind skating over its surface. Like a fingertip over glass. I remembered something. A small thing. The year Walter left for college. Mama added my name to the gas bill. Just in case, she said. In case anything ever goes wrong. It never came off. He never noticed. That evening, I found another document in the mailbox. Different return address. A lawyer's office in Duluth. Inside. Preliminary assessment. Estimated property value. Projected cost of remodeling for modern resale. No mention of heritage. No line item for blood. At the bottom, a line in bold. Client requests full valuation of dwelling and lot. Intends to proceed with offer to buyer contingent on cooperation from other party. Other party. That was me. The unnamed half. Of something whole I'd carried alone. I pressed the paper flat with both palms. Watched the creases disappear. Then I said it out loud. To no one in particular. He's not asking me to share. He's asking me to vanish. And that night, for the first time in years, I locked the workshop door from the inside. Because some things, even silence can't leave open. The next morning, I stood in the pantry, looking for nothing, touching everything. Mama's old canisters lined the shelf. Flour, sugar, barley. Each labeled in her handwriting. Still legible, though the ink had faded to soft gray. I opened the tin marked tea. Inside, chamomile, dried from last summer's garden. The petals crushed easily in my palm, releasing a scent. That felt like her voice. I made a cup, and sat on the back steps. The steam curled upward, like a ribbon, like something escaping, before it could be named. And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened the old photo album, the one with the cracked leather cover, tucked behind the coats. Too painful to touch. Inside, pictures of the workshop, newly built. Mama in overalls. Me, maybe 21, holding a paintbrush, with too much confidence. And Walter, grinning, but looking sideways, like he was always thinking about the next place. I stared at that page for a long time, finger resting on the edge of his smile. In the following pages, receipts were tucked between photos. Invoices for wood. Sketches for built-ins. Notes in Mama's tight cursive. Don't forget to finish June's corner shelf. She needs space for books. Her writing was everywhere. A quiet trail of care. Not notarized. Not official. But real. So much of our lives never gets a stamp. That afternoon, I pulled out the letter Walter had sent. The one with the phrase, intent to liquidate. I read it again. Slowly. This time, not with anger, but with clarity. I highlighted every word. That suggested equality. Shared. Joint. Mutual. None of them felt true. not in the way that counted. And suddenly, I saw what hurt the most. Not the offer. Not the valuation. Not even the idea of losing the house. It was the rewriting. The silent revision. Of who I was. Of what I had given. Of what this place meant. I stood, walked to the fireplace, and slid the album into the center of the mantel. Let it sit there. In plain sight. No need to hide proof. Then I whispered. Just once. She left it to me because I stayed. That evening, I made dinner. Set the table for one. But placed 2 napkins. And I thought, if memory isn't written in law, can it still stand up in court? The court notice came folded into thirds. Thin paper. Too thin for what it carried. I opened it slowly. Hands steady. Eyes already knowing. A date. A docket number. A formal request for arbitration. Walter had filed a petition to sell the property in absence of mutual agreement. He had gone to court. Without telling me. Without a conversation. Without a warning. The air left the room. But I stayed sitting. Stared at the words. Watched them rearrange themselves into something meaner. Failure to respond may result in default judgment. I traced that sentence with my finger. Then folded the letter back. Exactly the way it arrived. Sharp edges. No emotion. I sat still for hours. The envelope resting on my lap. It felt heavier than it should. Not because of the paper, but because of everything behind it. The years. The care. The silence mistaken for surrender. That night, I didn't sleep in my bed. I sat in the sunroom. Until morning reached through the windows. Like a quiet apology. I wrapped myself in Mama's shawl. And whispered. Every small thing I'd done to keep this house upright. Replacing shingles. Catching leaks. Trimming back branches. Before storms could bring them down. I whispered until my throat was dry. And still, the walls didn't answer. The next morning, I brewed coffee out of habit. But the cup remained full. Untouched. Even the scent, normally grounding, felt distant. As if it belonged to someone else now. Someone still welcome here. I watched the steam fade. Then poured it down the sink. 2 days later, I packed a suitcase. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't stand to sit inside a house whose silence had turned against me. I left the plants watered, turned off the pilot light, laid the apron over the workshop stool, like Mama used to do, at the end of a long day. Then I walked out. The cold met me at the porch step. Sharp. Not cruel, just honest. I drove to Frida's house. An old friend. Widowed 10 years now. We hadn't seen each other in months. She opened the door. Hair in rollers. A mug of soup in hand. June? She blinked. Then stepped aside. Without asking a thing. Sometimes Mercy wears a bathrobe. And smells like chicken broth. She led me to the guest room. Small. Clean. A crocheted blanket folded over the foot of the bed. I sat down. The mattress was softer than I expected. Too soft. Like it hadn't earned the weight of a life. I lay back. Stared at the ceiling. The fan moved in slow, uneven circles. The hum was low. Almost maternal. But the air smelled different. Not bad. Just not mine. No cedar. No glue. No ghost of lemon oil soaked into the floorboards. Just lavender sachets. And the faint scent of menthol. I turned to the nightstand. A Bible. A coaster. A picture frame empty. My fingers brushed its edge. And pulled back. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I just lay still. Listening to the pipes groan. In a house that didn't know my name. And I thought, if they can take you from your home, can they also take the part of you that knew how to belong? The second night at Frida's, I woke to silence so deep, It felt like weight. Not absence. Something denser. Like the air had thickened. Just to remind me. This wasn't my home. I sat up. The blanket slipping off my shoulders. The window faced east. The moon caught on the edge of the glass. Not full. Not new. Just tired. I padded down the hallway. The floor creaked under each step. Not like the soft groan of pine back at my house. This was sharper. Less forgiving. In the kitchen. The fridge hummed. A clock ticked. Steady and unfamiliar. I poured a glass of water. Held it in both hands. Like it might ground me. But everything felt borrowed. Even the silence. I thought about calling Walter. Just once. Not to argue. Not even to plead. Just to ask. Why now? Why this way? But I didn't. Instead, I sat by the small table near the back door. And listened to the wind. It brushed against the siding. With the same rhythm. As Mama's breathing in her final week. Shallow, spaced, unsure. My chest ached. I wasn't angry. I wasn't brave. I was displaced. And displacement isn't just about losing a roof. It's about losing the rhythm of your days. The shelf where your favorite spoon sits. The sound of your own footsteps. On familiar wood. The way the light hits the counter. Just before noon. Frida had been kind. Gentle, even. She offered soup. Clean towels. A place to rest. But rest didn't come easy. When the world you built was being quietly unbuilt. In your absence. I tried to read. The words swam. I tried to pray. The silence answered back. So I sat, watching the steam rise from my tea, and thought about every woman who'd been asked to let go of a place because someone else decided she didn't need it anymore, and how many of them let go quietly because they thought that was grace. But grace, I was starting to believe, wasn't the same thing as disappearing. The next morning, I helped Frida fold laundry. Her hands moved slower than I remembered. She smiled, but her eyes studied me, like someone watching a tree that started to lean too far. At lunch, she said gently, "You know you could stay here, as long as you need." I nodded, but something in me curled away from the kindness. Because staying meant letting go, and letting go felt too close to surrender. Later that evening, I opened the drawer beside the guest bed. Inside was a pen, a pad of lined paper, and an envelope. I wrote my name at the top, then paused. The letters looked foreign. Not like mine. Not like someone who still had a place. And I thought, when they make you leave quietly, what part of you learns to stop speaking altogether? Frida meant well. Every morning, she made oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins. She laid out my teacup next to hers. Matching porcelain, chipped on opposite sides. "Feels like a pair," she joked once. I smiled. But I didn't laugh. I appreciated the warmth. The familiarity she tried to build. But it wasn't mine. Not the spoon. Not the rhythm of the kettle. Not even the scent of her hand lotion. Floral. Too bright. Each day blurred into the next. The guest room never asked for me. It simply received me. Like a waiting room. No one ever calls your name in. One afternoon, Frida sat beside me while we sorted old buttons. Something quiet we used to do when our kids were little. She looked up at me once and said, "You've always been stronger than you let on." I paused. Let the words settle. Then I replied, almost without thinking, "Maybe. But strength doesn't count if it doesn't speak." She didn't respond right away. Just took my hand. Soft. Gentle. But it stayed in my mind. That sentence. Like a small seed. Caught between two floorboards. Unnoticed. until something warm finds it. That evening, I went to the back porch. The air was still. The light pinked at the edge of the sky. I wrapped myself in Mama's shawl, even though it wasn't cold. And I started thinking about the list. The list I had made weeks ago. The one tucked inside my yellow pad. Of everything I'd fixed. Everything I'd held up. I remembered one line. I wrote in the margin. If no one else will record it, I will. I went back inside. Pulled the pad from my bag. Ran my fingers over that line. Then turned to a fresh page. And I wrote. What still belongs to me? I paused. And slowly, the words began to come. Not legal terms. Not names or titles. But memories. Small things. The way the light hit the workshop door. At 4:15 every fall afternoon. The sound of the radio. When Mama baked bread. The hum I made. Whenever I stitched a torn collar. Things that had no price. But proved I'd been there. I wasn't planning anything. Not yet. But I was remembering. Claiming. And I thought. If they could erase me with silence, maybe I could answer back. Without raising my voice. Not louder. Just truer. The list grew. Each night, I added one thing I remembered. That no one else could verify. But I knew was real. The day Mama taught me. How to bend veneer without splitting it. The way Walter used to cry. When the school bus left without him. The smell of varnish. And fresh cinnamon rolls. Mingling in the kitchen. On the last morning before her diagnosis. None of it was in court documents. None of it lived in Walter's petitions. But I wrote it anyway. Because forgetting had begun to feel like betrayal. One evening, Frida sat beside me. As I scribbled in the corner of the porch. What are you working on? She asked. Evidence, I said. Not smiling. Not blinking. She tilted her head. Curious, maybe a little afraid. But she didn't press. I turned back to the page. My handwriting looked different than it used to. Sharper. Tighter. Like it had something to prove. Later that night, I opened the side pocket of my old suitcase. The zipper stuck. But I worked it free. Inside. A folder I hadn't touched in years. Legal papers. Old notes from a real estate course. I took in my 40s. Back when I thought I might manage the family land portfolio. The class only lasted 8 weeks. But I kept the materials. And there it was. Highlighted in pink. A gift deed is a binding transfer of ownership. If notarized and recorded, it supersedes future claims unless legally overturned. I read that line 3 times. My throat felt dry. Not with shock. But with recognition. I had forgotten I knew this. Forgotten that part of me. Had once studied how land stays in rightful hands. That I hadn't just been a caretaker. I had once been a student. A reader. A woman preparing. For something no one believed she'd need to fight. I took the gift deed from its envelope. Mama's handwriting. The signature of Reverend Booker from First Lutheran. The embossed county seal. I held it to the light. Not just to check it, but to remind myself that it was real. Tangible. A truth written in ink. Not memory. And I thought, maybe I wasn't starting over. Maybe I'd been preparing all along. I placed the folder on the nightstand. Stacked my notebook on top. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up. No dreams. No dread. Just quiet. But not the kind that erases. The kind that waits. The kind that listens. The next morning, I ironed my shirt. The good one. The one with the small stitched initials near the hem. J. H. A detail Mama added. Because she said even invisible things deserve a name. I buttoned it slowly. My hands moved with a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. I packed the folder. Slipped it into a cloth bag. Along with my notebook. And a pen that still worked. Despite its age. Then I asked Frida if I could borrow her car. She didn't ask where I was going, just handed me the keys and said, "Bring back something good." Downtown Bemidji hadn't changed. Still the same 3 stoplights. Still the smell of baked bread from the corner cafe, where teenagers now lingered, glowing blue from their phones. I parked across from a law office. Davison, Co., etched in old brass. Inside was warm. Too warm. The receptionist was young. Hair too perfect. Eyes kind, but distracted. She asked if I had an appointment. "No," I said. "But I brought something that might need protecting." 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man named Joel. Late 40s. Nice tie. Didn't speak down to me. He looked at the deed. Then at me. His eyebrows rose just slightly. "This is solid," he said. "You've got standing." I nodded. Didn't smile. "I didn't come here to fight," I told him. "I came here to stop disappearing." He looked at me longer this time, then leaned back in his chair. "I think we can help you with that." I left the office with a card, a folder, and something I hadn't carried in a while. Wait. Not the heavy kind. The kind that roots you. The kind that reminds you you're still holding ground. That night, back at Frida's, I didn't unpack. I placed the folder by the guest bed, lit a single candle, and sat beside it, watching the flame lean, but never go out. And I thought, maybe justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it writes itself quietly. On paper, no one expects you to keep. Sometimes, it lives in the drawer you never stopped locking. And sometimes, it wears your name, stitched, in small letters, at the hem of your silence. Have you ever had to prove your worth without raising your voice? We'd be honored to hear your story in the comments. You are not alone. You are not invisible. You are part of something strong. Subscribe to Kamar FM, where every story is a second chance. I didn't tell anyone I was going back. Not even Frida. I just folded my good shirt, packed the folder with the deed, and left before sunrise. The road to the house felt longer than I remembered. Maybe it was the light. That pale, early kind, that makes everything look like memory. When I turned onto the gravel drive, the tires crunched louder than usual, like the house needed to hear. I was coming home. The porch light was off. Of course it was. Walter hadn't been back. But I didn't need permission to turn the key. Inside, the air was cold. Still. Like it had paused. Waiting to see if I'd come back for good. I set my bag on the table. Peeled off my gloves. Ran my hand along the back of Mama's chair. Then I lit the stove. Not because I needed heat. But because flame meant presence. Flame meant intention. While the kettle warmed, I moved through the house. Checked the windows. Ran the water in the bathroom. Opened and closed each door. Not for security, but for something quieter. Reclaiming. In the workshop, dust clung to the air like smoke. I opened the small drawer beneath the workbench. Still there. The tiny brass stamp with my initials. I used to press it into the backs of shelves. A quiet signature. Proof that I had shaped something. I turned it over in my hand. Thought about branding more than wood. Later that afternoon, I called Joel, the lawyer. "I'm back," I told him. His voice brightened. "Ready to make things official?" "Almost," I said. "I'd like to add something to the plan." There was a pause. Then the sound of paper shuffling. "I'm listening." I told him what I wanted to do with the property. If the court upheld my deed. Not just keep it, but designate it. A historical homestead. Preserved. Named after Mama. He didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he said, "That's a quiet kind of justice." "I know," I replied. "That's the only kind I trust now." After we hung up, I made tea. Poured it into the mug with the hairline crack. The one Walter broke. The one Mama kept. Because some things, even broken, still hold warmth. I sat by the window and wrote one more line in my notebook. Dignity is the deed I never stopped holding. The next morning, I made a list. Not chores this time. Steps. Steps to protect what already belonged to me. I called the county clerk. Asked about registering the house as a historical residence. They transferred me twice before a woman named Paula picked up. She sounded tired. Efficient. But not unkind. I can send you the forms, she said. But we'll need proof photos, original plans, family history. I have all of that, I told her. Because I did. Tucked into Mama's recipe box was more than flower-stained cards. There were sketches of the original house. Letters between her and the builder. Even receipts for the lumber. From the old mill down by Pine Hollow. I opened the box slowly. Held each paper. Like it might crumble if I breathed too hard. One envelope had yellowed edges. Inside, a photograph. Mama standing in front of the frame of the house. One hand on her hip. A hammer in the other. She looked young. Not strong, the way men define it. But solid. Like she'd already decided. This house would outlive them all. I added the photo to a new folder. Labeled it in pencil. Legacy submission. By noon, I had 3 piles. 1. Legal deed and ownership papers. 2. Preservation documents. 3. Personal history photos, sketches, letters. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't noise. It was structure. Like the way I used to build tables. Measure twice. Cut once. Sand until the wood felt like skin. Later that day, I drove into town. Made copies at the print shop. The girl at the counter looked no older than 20. She glanced at the old photos. "This your mom?" she asked, holding one up. I nodded. "She built the house I'm standing in." "Wow," she said. Then paused. "That's kind of incredible." I didn't reply. But something in my chest shifted. Like a window had opened. Somewhere, I'd forgotten was nailed shut. I returned home. Filed the originals. And slid the copies into a new envelope. On the front. To be delivered only by hand. I set it by the front door. Then I swept the porch. Repaired a loose rail. Watered the mums Mama planted. 15 years ago. And that somehow still bloomed. Even when the air turned bitter. The evening light caught the nails I'd hammered in. They glinted quiet, but sure. And I thought, this isn't a fight. It's a restoration. I arrived at the courthouse at 9:17. Not early. Not late. Just ready. The envelope sat on my lap as I waited in the parking lot. I ran my thumb along the edge. Felt the weight of each page inside. Proof. Memory. Intention. I looked up at the building. Brick. Unadorned. Like it didn't need to impress anyone. I liked that. Inside, the hallway smelled of floor wax and old ink. A man held the door for me. Didn't ask what I was there for. Didn't look twice. And that, too, felt like power. I approached the clerk's window. The glass was thick. The speaker crackled. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I slid the envelope through the opening. "I'd like to file a response to a pending petition," I said. "My name is June Halberg." She typed something. Asked for my ID. I handed it over. Then she looked up. "Do you have legal representation?" I nodded. "Then everything's in motion," she said. Stamping the corner of the form. The sound echoed. Small, final. As I turned to leave, she added softly, "Good luck." But I didn't feel like I needed luck. I needed time. And I had already waited long enough. Back home, I hung my coat on the same peg as Mama's. It sagged slightly. Still held the shape of her shoulders. I let my fingers rest there. Just for a moment. Then I walked out to the yard. The grass had gone dull with frost. But underneath, I knew roots still held. Quiet, invisible strength. I knelt beside the stone border we built together. The one Walter never liked. Because it wasn't symmetrical. I pulled out weeds. Brushed away fallen leaves. And for the first time in weeks, I hummed. Not a song. Just a sound. That belonged to no one but me. Later that evening, I called Joel. I filed the packet, I said. Good, he replied. Next steps court review. We're in a strong position. I'm not trying to win, I told him. I know, he said. You're trying to stay. That night, I slept with the window open. The wind crept in. Gentle. Cool. But not unwelcome. I pulled the quilt to my chest. Felt the stitching between my fingers. Mama's work. Thread by thread. And I thought, when silence is your greatest weapon, they never see you coming. The courthouse hallway smelled like dust and old coffee. I sat on a wooden bench. Outside room 4B. The kind of bench that remembered everyone. Who'd ever waited on it. Every shift. Every silence. Joel arrived 5 minutes before the hearing. Pressed tie. Folders in hand. He nodded at me, nothing flashy. Just enough to say, "You're not alone in this." Walter was already inside. I saw him through the narrow glass panel. Adjusting his sleeves. Murmuring something to his lawyer. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Just shrunken. Like someone who thought the outcome was already written. The clerk called my name. June Halberg? I stood. My knees cracked. But I didn't wince. Inside, the courtroom was colder than the hallway. Quiet. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum in restraint. I sat beside Joel. He slid the folder toward me. Inside. My deed. My photos. My mother's note in pencil. Gifted to June, for care beyond measure. I ran my fingers across that page. Just once. Like a goodbye. Or a grounding. The judge entered. Graying hair. Sharp eyes. But not unkind. She asked Walter's side to begin. His lawyer stood. Spoke in measured tones. Argued fair division. Said the property had been jointly assumed. Said I had no intention to renovate or sell. That I was emotionally invested. But legally unclear. Joel didn't interrupt. Didn't shift. Just waited. When it was our turn, he stood. Opened the folder slowly. Explained the notarized deed. The notarizing party. The intent. The chain of care. Then he said, "This isn't just a house. It's a documented act of trust. Transferred not by transaction, but by time, labor, and legacy." The judge looked down at the documents. Flipped through the pages. Paused on the photo of Mama with the hammer. Her hand on her hip. Her eyes forward. Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Halberg," she said. "Do you wish to add anything?" I inhaled slowly. Held her gaze. Then I said, "Just because I didn't speak, doesn't mean I didn't see." The room went still. After I spoke. No murmurs. No shifting chairs. Just stillness. Even Walter looked down. Not in shame. At least not yet. But in recognition. The judge didn't reply right away. She turned the page again. Held the deed up toward the light. Checked the signature. The seal. Then she reached for a sheet of paper. From her own folder. Notes she'd taken. "According to this record," she said, "the deed is valid, properly executed, and uncontested in its original intent. Until this petition." Joel nodded once. Hands folded. Calm. Walter's lawyer tried to interject. Something about emotional influence. About timelines and family misunderstanding. The judge raised one hand. "I've read every page," she said. "There is no ambiguity here. Ownership rests with Miss June Halberg solely. The word hung in the air. Solely. Not shared. Not conditional. Not sentimental. Legal. Walter leaned back. Exhaled through his nose. No outburst. Just a long, low breath. Like someone who'd hoped the wind would be on his side. I didn't gloat. Didn't flinch. I simply sat, feeling the soles of my shoes pressed against the worn courthouse floor. The judge turned to me once more. If you choose to pursue historical designation, she said, the court encourages full preservation. This is a rare example of quiet generational stewardship. I blinked. That word, stewardship, I hadn't heard it in years. But it landed softly, like something returned. Instead of stolen, Joel closed the folder, passed me a small slip of paper. A copy of the judge's ruling. Stamped. Dated. Final. I folded it. Carefully. Pressed it between my palms. Walter rose without a word. He didn't look at me. Didn't look back. But just before he left, he paused by the door, one hand on the frame. And for the first time since all this began, his voice cracked ever so slightly. She left it to you, he said. Quiet. Not a question. Not a concession. Just a truth that had finally found its voice. Then he walked out. And I stayed. Not because I'd won, but because I'd remained. And in that courtroom, with no audience, no applause, no parade, justice had taken its full shape. Not loud, not sharp, but complete. I walked out of the courthouse. Without fanfare. No one clapped. No one waited with flowers. No reporters. No headlines. Just sky. Wide. Soft. Gray with early November. I paused on the steps. Took a slow breath. Let the air fill every corner of me. That had been holding its breath. For far too long. Joel joined me a moment later. You handled that beautifully, he said. I nodded. I didn't say much. You didn't need to. He offered to buy me coffee. But I declined. There was something sacred about going home. Without another word. The drive back was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask questions. When I pulled into the gravel path, the house looked exactly the same. But it felt different. Not newer. Not bigger. Just returned. I unlocked the front door. With the same key I'd used for 45 years. But for the first time, it felt like confirmation. Not just habit. Inside, everything waited. Just as I'd left it. The tea kettle. The folded shawl. The apron still draped across the chair. In the workshop. I walked through each room. Not to check. Not to clean. But to say, I'm here. Still here. I took out the stamped ruling. Framed it. Not for pride. But for protection. Then I placed it beside Mama's photo. The one in her workshop clothes. Smiling without needing to. The afternoon sun stretched across the floor. Dappled through the lace curtains she sewed by hand. Dust floated in its path. Slow, golden, weightless. I stood in that light. Holding nothing. Carrying everything. Then I whispered. As if she were still listening. He tried to sell what you gave me. But I remembered the terms. And I meant more than paper. I meant the years. The care. The labor passed down. Not in words. But in hands. As the clock in the hallway ticked forward, I let the silence settle. Not heavy. Not cold. Just. Earned. And I thought. Justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes. It waits for you to stop opening the door. To anyone who forgot your name. The lake thawed early that year. By mid-March. Thin sheets of ice cracked along the shoreline. Each morning, I'd sit by the back window. With a cup of black coffee. And watch the water breathe again. The porch creaked in familiar ways. The wind returned to its rightful place, between the pines and the kitchen door. And the light. Oh, the light. It found corners I thought I'd lost. Life didn't bloom all at once. It stretched. Soft and slow. Like fingers learning how to hold again. I planted bulbs in the front garden. Tulips. Mostly. Some daffodils. They were Mama's favorite. Yellow is what forgiveness would look like, she used to say. I whispered that line, as I pressed each bulb into the dirt. Not out of ceremony, but memory. I didn't reopen the workshop right away. I dusted it, yes. Ran my fingers along the bench. Checked the tools. But I left the apron where it hung. Still draped across the old stool. Still holding the curve of my mother's habit. Instead, I spent my time in the sunroom. Reading. Sometimes writing. Mostly sitting. The notebook now lived on the coffee table. The one with every line I'd written. On what still belonged to me. I kept adding to it. Not just the big things. Not just deeds or dates. But small claims. The shape of the faucet handle I replaced in 1994. The sound of the screen door hitting the frame twice before it catches. The scratch on the hallway baseboard from when Walter rode his tricycle too fast. Proof of presence. Evidence of care. A record of what silence had seen. Some days, I heard birds outside. I didn't recognize. New ones, maybe. Or maybe I just hadn't been listening before. Frida came by once a week. She brought marmalade. And stories from the church ladies. I hadn't seen in months. She never asked about Walter. Neither did I. We talked about the tulips. The stubborn faucet. The squirrel that kept stealing seed from the feeder. Once, before leaving, she paused by the front step. You look more here than ever, she said. I didn't reply. But I knew what she meant. I was no longer waiting to be asked back in. One afternoon, a letter arrived in a soft blue envelope. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. Madeline. Inside, a photo of her baby. A girl, wrapped in flannel. Wide eyes. And a note. I know things have been strange. But I wanted her to know where she comes from. And who stood still long enough to hold it. I folded the letter gently. Placed it in the drawer. Beneath the folder with Mama's deed. Then I went outside. Walked to the edge of the lake. And sat on the same stone I'd once cried beside. Except this time, there were no tears. Only sun. Only breeze. Only the sound of water. Making room again. And I thought, maybe legacy isn't what you leave behind. Maybe it's what stays standing. When no one thought you would. By early April, the tulips began to break the surface. Tiny green blades. Pushing through the dark soil. Like quiet declarations. I'm still here. I checked them every morning. Not out of worry, but out of awe. How something so delicate could insist on returning. Year after year. Without ever being invited. I started leaving the front door open. In the afternoons. Letting the breeze find its way. Through the screen. Letting the house breathe again. It no longer felt like I had to protect every corner. The quiet no longer felt defensive. It felt chosen. One morning, I opened the workshop. Not to work. Just to sit. The light fell across the bench. In long, golden strokes. Dust shimmered in the sunbeam. Everything was as I left it. Still. Patient. I pulled the apron off the stool. Folded it gently. Placed it in a cedar-lined box. Then I swept the floor. Each motion steady. Like a prayer, you say. Not to be heard. But to hear yourself again. I framed Mama's recipe card. The lemon loaf. Hung it above the bench. A kind of altar. Not to the past. But to the way care leaves a mark. Without making a sound. That evening, I lit a candle. In the kitchen window. No occasion. No audience. Just light. The house glowed in its corners. Subtle. Warm. And for the first time, in a long time, I didn't feel like I was defending anything. I was simply living. Later, I wrote one final page in my notebook. This home was not defended. It was remembered. And that remembering was enough. I signed my name beneath it. Full name. First and last. Clear and slow. As if claiming not just ownership, but authorship. That night, I placed the notebook in a drawer. Alongside the court ruling, the photo of Mama, and Madeline's letter. Then I made myself tea. No sugar. No lemon. Just strong, dark warmth. And as I stood by the window, watching the porch light flicker against the dusk, I whispered, for no one to hear but the walls. We stayed. Me. Mama. The quiet. The deed. The soil. The story. And I thought, maybe survival isn't the loud part. Maybe it's the part that outlasts. Without asking for applause, the porch still creaks when I step on it. The mums still bloom, even through frost. And the silence, it no longer feels empty. It feels earned. What does legacy mean to you? Have you ever fought quietly? To hold on to something others thought you'd let go? We invite you to share your reflections in the comments. You never know who may need to read your words. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are part of something that endures. Subscribe to Kamar FM, where every story is a second chance.